What's up, gardeners and homesteaders? I hope you're enjoying the fall weather. We're having a nice, very warm fall day in southeastern North Carolina on the coast. We're going to talk about my planting schedule for seeds this year. I'm going to go all the way from now until spring. Spoiler alert, it starts next week. And I'm going to give you my planting dates. And you can adjust these based on your zone. So if I'm in zone 8, if you're in zone 7 or 6, you can adjust it a little bit based on your last frost date. And hopefully this will help you. And we're gonna start with spring crops and go all the way into summer crops and the entire schedule. But first, I wanna check on my seedlings. Then we're gonna go over the planting dates, and then we're gonna come back and we're gonna get a couple groceries for dinner tonight. This is the seeds that I planted on the last video or a couple videos ago, and they're already coming up nice. And all these are going to be onions. So we've gone down the line and we've given these their first haircut. And then these right here, we actually had only done 3 6-packs, so we did another 6-pack just to kind of fill out this 10-20 tray, because it's just a lot easier to manage. And I mean, honestly, the care for these is the same. So putting another plant in here with different care needs kind of makes it a little bit more difficult. So we're still waiting for these to germinate, but they should be like any day now. And I don't have these on any bottom heat, but they typically don't really require a lot of bottom heat. I did a test and it was a little bit delayed, but we still got growth. So these will be getting trimmed in the next day or two, and we'll probably shoot them a little fertilizer and then give them their first haircut too. So 5 days ago, I came and I started a round of seeds for the greenhouse. And these seeds will be planted specifically in the greenhouse. But we can see from here over is all turnips. And they are going to be planted in the greenhouse and under the low tunnel that we have. And then we started some beets here, which they haven't popped yet. They should be pretty close. Not as many. And then I actually put some yodfa in here, which, oh, we got one that popped right here. So that's a new one for today. Yodfa is a weird vegetable. I grew it last year and it did fantastic in my garden. It looked amazing, better than everything else. But I didn't know how to eat it, so I never ate it. So then I went back and I looked at the plant profile, and it said that it's like a cross between, you eat the stems, and it's like an asparagus and a broccoli mix. I'm like, okay, let's redo it. But I mean, it did so well last year. Like, how can I not plant it in my garden? So we're gonna give that another shot. We still have some onions here. So these got their haircut. And then our rutabaga is doing good. It's actually time to fertilize them. They're not looking as green as I'd like. And we're still waiting on our spinach over here. So we'll see. I gotta be honest, I'm not a good spinach grower. I mean, it is what it is. I think it's too warm in the greenhouse for them. It's too cold out here. So I'll probably do them inside. And then the other thing I'm doing in my garden right now, and it looks super weird, the trellis is down and I'm rebuilding them. And so I had wood trellises and they're on the ground here, but I've got to I put them up with these U-nails. I don't know what they're called, fencing nails, I believe. And I've got to grind them off. So I'm gonna, instead of using wood, I had some extra T-posts from a redo I did in my garden. So I'm gonna use the T-posts and it's gonna be a more permanent setup. I'm trying to get myself away from having to replace all these wood structures and stuff over time. It's a super pain in the ass to put it up and then have to take it down and it rots and all that stuff. So by doing that, that's gonna be a permanent setup, I believe. And then we can, kind of focus our energy in other places instead of having to redo trellises every couple of years. Because, I mean, I don't know about you, but we got better things to do. All right, so I have the master list here, and this is gonna go all the way until April 15th. So our last frost date, it depends on where you look at. It can be anywhere from March 21st until April 15th, roughly. And usually around Easter, we get a frost. So I know, based on my experience, to kind of wait as long as possible. So that's where these planting dates come in. And these are seed starting dates, they're not planting dates. But starting December 15th, and I've done it so it's every 2 weeks. So every 2 weeks I'll be making some kind of planting of some sort. We're going to do onions, cabbage, broccoli, cauliflower, collards, kale, turnips, kohlrabi, and rutabaga. And so we'll do different amounts of these, and the earlier that we have for these plants, we'll do less, and then there'll be a peak period for planting for them, and then we'll do more, so we can kind of get a staggered succession sowing and harvest around. So, and we're doing multiple varieties of each, but, and then on the new year, which would be January 1st, which honestly, I may or may not do it that day, it just kind of depends. We're going to do cabbage, broccoli, cauliflower, collards, kale, lettuce, cilantro, chard, kohlrabi, and rutabaga. And so you can see that we've added a couple in, and we've taken away onions at this point. And I may even take away onions on the 15th because honestly, I have like 500 going right now. I don't need any more. And a lot of these are going to be planted in my garden, but we're also going to sell them at a farmer's market too, the seedlings and stuff like that. So that's why we're going to be doing extras. But as we get closer and closer to it, you know, this is after the first of the year. If you take your seeds and you go, okay, I want to plant them, and the plant date is X, then you need to count back roughly about 6 weeks. And in my experience, I usually do about 8 weeks, because the hardening off period stops the growth for about a week. I want to make sure that I'm not including that week of hardening off and that slow growth period in it, because our springs here we can go from winter to almost summer immediately. And then not to mention the yo-yo season where it's hot, cold. It can cause these things to bolt. So we need to stay on top of that and plan for that so we don't waste that valuable week. On the 15th, we're going to be doing all of the same things, except for we're also going to be doing peppers. So we plan to do them on the 15th. We may actually start a couple on the 1st just to give them as much as possible. And we'll be doing multiple peppers at that point. So we'll be doing our hots and our sweets and stuff like that, because we want to get them started so we can get them growing and get a big enough plant, because I up pot my peppers over time so I can get a bigger plant in the garden, and that'll lead to an earlier harvest and a stronger plant. And then also on the 15th, we're going to attempt to add spinach at the same time. So that'll be another thing that we're going to add in. And then on the 1st of February, we're going to be doing collards, kale, and now lettuces, chard, kohlrabi, rutabaga again, peppers, eggplants, turnips, spinach, and then we'll start our tomatoes at that point. And we're not going to start all of them. So we'll start anything I think we'll probably start some cherry peppers or tomatoes. We'll start our ground cherries, and then a determinate variety. And so the next week we move over, we will be taking away cilantro, and actually that's all we're going to be taking out is cilantro. So on Valentine's Day, which, I mean, I love gardening, so why not celebrate it on Valentine's Day? We're going to be doing basically the bulk of our summer vegetables, our nightshades and stuff like that. So we'll be doing that, and then we'll be starting to taper off on our cold season veggies at that point. Because in my area in February, we can still be cold, but at the same time, we can still be upwards of, we can start peaking in the 70s and even 80s at that point. And it won't be prolonged. It could be just a peak up, but you know that it's on the way at this point. And so March 1st, we will be doing lettuce, chard, kohlrabi, peppers, eggplants, a couple more turnips, maybe some spinach, tomatoes, and then we're going to add basil, marigolds, zinnias, oregano, and then we're going to start our peanuts for selling, not for us to plant, but to sell, because I'm going to give it another go. So we're now starting to add in flowers. And the oregano, I have never started it from seed, and I was reading that it can be pretty difficult to start. So we may actually end up starting that earlier. But going through the list, and I want to be clear too, this doesn't include all the perennial flowers that we're going to start. Some of those need to be started earlier, and I haven't totally decided. I got to look and see what's left in my seeds, but we're not going to do a whole lot of those. I always try to sow some kind of perennial just to kind of keep it going into my yard at some point. On the 14th of March, now we really start getting into almost all summer vegetables. The only thing left would be lettuce, chard, and turnips. And so turnips are a really quick crop. They come and go. So you can keep growing them and keep growing them. My greenhouse just vented, I heard it. But we're going to be adding, along with the basil, marigold, zinnias, oregano, peanuts, now we're going to be doing cucumbers, squash, watermelons, cantaloupe, pumpkins, and then winter squash. And so some of these, like at this point, like last year, I remember we didn't even get a frost until our last frost was, I think, around this date, like March 17th or something, for the most part. So you can really take a chance and get things going earlier. But for stuff like winter squash, pumpkins, cantaloupes, watermelons, and cucumbers and squashes, you don't really want them to be in a pot for too long. They don't like to have their roots disturbed too much. So we plan those for a month out. So our last frost date, like we said, is April 15th. So on March 14th, we're going to be starting those. And then if they have to go a little bit longer, that's fine. But we're going to be ready to put them in the ground or sell them to somebody come April 15th. So, we have that period of growth, but it's quick. So my seed shelf is 4 shelves high. I have my greenhouse, which I can do some stuff in, but it gets a little tricky with the way that the temperature drops in there. So it seems like a lot, but if you think about the way the seasons change and the way the crops go, and then planting and selling and stuff like that, we can really rotate these crops, just like in the garden, out of your seed starting area very easily. Not to mention, the warmer it gets, I have another light set up in my garage where I can still have stuff, like I call it the overflow. So things that are either getting too big or things that just don't need as much time, I can put out there as well. And it's not much, it's just 1 4-foot light. But in that space, I can get a lot of plants in there. And so April 1st will be our last sowing of lettuce. So we won't be doing any more after that I know of. I may end up doing more to kind of see how long I can get it to go. But we're going to be doing basil, marigolds, zinnias, oregano, peanuts, cucumbers, squash, watermelons, cantaloupe, pumpkins, and winter squash. So again, we're just starting to step down at this point. And then on the 15th, the only things that we're going to be starting are cucumbers, squash, watermelons, cantaloupe, pumpkins, and then winter squash. And that's going to be the trigger date in which we're going to start really putting in some of the more hardier vegetables. And at the same time, we'll be up potting our tomatoes and our peppers, because I like to get my tomatoes as big as possible to get them in, because that allows me to get a harvest quicker. So I get an earlier harvest. And then like my indeterminates, at this point, they're going to start to take off. So, I've put them in pots. I've upgraded them from a 6-pack to a 4-inch pot, which is, about that deep, about like this. I don't have one handy. And within a week, the plant goes from this tall to this tall, and a stalk about as big as your pinky almost, maybe even bigger, or my pinky, which is bigger. So it doesn't take a lot. And at this point too, we start clearing out more space, because now we're hardening everything off, and we have it all out on our porch, and it's getting that nice clean sunlight. So it's going to take off, and it's going to grow more and more. So at some point you'll end up seeing that my whole porch will end up being covered with different plants and stuff like that as we move them out and get them going, which will allow us to start our second crop. So when our squash is in the height of production, we'll start sowing more of that. And then, we have the squash vine borer to deal with, so we'll start more then, and then we'll just kind of keep compounding onto it. So we're going to do a second sowing of tomatoes, and we're going to aim to do it in July, probably July. And so we'll try to have more plants out by then. And I haven't decided if I'm just going to start by seed or I'm going to start suckers. I haven't decided what I want to do just yet. I'm leaning more towards suckers just because it's a lot easier. So we can do that as well. But everything else will be out. And then at that time, on the 15th, the last thing we're going to really start for a new planting is going to be our Brussels sprouts. And we're going to aim to get those into the ground in early June or late May. So we're going to really shoot for that time frame to try and get a bigger plant and more production. So around this time next year, we can be harvesting those Brussels sprouts maybe a little bit early. So we'll do succession planting of those too, but there'll be more about that stuff to come. Easy to think that we're already there. I mean, we're gonna start planting, and it's gonna be a slow process, but it's gonna happen quick. And in the meantime, we've also got to get our gardens topped off with soil. We're gonna have to be amending the beds a little bit more. We're gonna have to give them a good weeding and mulching. And then I've got to redo the trellises. So there's a lot that happens. And so in our area, it doesn't really stop. It slows down and comes to a crawl. But with the seed starting inside and stuff like that, it's going to be crazy. And we haven't even talked about my schedule for direct sowing, which we're going to do another video about that because that's just a whole separate scenario. And I've really got to figure out what and when I'm going to direct sow. But I see a couple things here. It's funny, now that I have this trellis down, I have a whole different view, and I see some groceries for tonight. So let's get something to eat. Radishes, and we have a mixture of turnips and watermelon radishes here. And I believe that we have a fair amount of these big radishes in here. Oh yeah. That's gonna be good tonight. What else can we get? Here's another good sized one. Look at this. It's crazy. Doesn't take a lot. And we just do little side dishes with these. Ah, right here in the front. Bam. That would be a turnip, I believe. It's funny, we planted the seeds, and then we had what I thought was a raccoon, and last night, my little system I have set up, this solar light on the shed here, I saw a possum in my garden, but he got in and he dug it up and he mixed all my seeds up. So when we do the watermelon radishes and we do the turnips, we don't really know what we're getting until we get it in the house. So it's always tricky. So I'm thinking it looks like we have one radish or two radishes and one turnip. We'll see, but I mean, the size of this, I mean, that's crazy. No spacing really because, like I said, the possum mixed it all up. So we've got plenty in there. And then we just come out every once in a while and we grab them. As long as we're not getting a lot of rain and it's not going to split, we don't worry about it. So we just come out and grab them when we need them. And so that'll be dinner tonight. And if we got two different kinds, then we'll either do a mixture or we'll separate it. So if you guys are starting your seeds, let me know when you plan to start them and what triggers in your mind when to plant them out. I'd be curious to know about that, because just because it says it's the end of the day, end of the frost, doesn't mean it is.